All right. That probably will do it. There we go. So, welcome back to another thrilling installment of Storytime Saturdays. I am your narrator, intrepid and valorous, or whatever. Maybe not valorous, but intrepid. Fraggeth, and I will be reading the first part of a novel in 4 installments called Brigands of the Moon, the Book of Greg Haljan, by a guy named Ray Cummings. I'm trying to remember anything about Ray Cummings right now. I'm about to go and because I told myself I was going to do research. Ray Cummings. Let's see the first results that Wikipedia pops up and go from there. Or, the internet will just die. That's fine. Nope, there we go. Wow, born August 30th, 1887, and lived until January 23rd, 1957. Apparently did comic books as well as novels. Oh, cool. Later work. During the 1940s, with his literary career in eclipse, Cummings anonymously scripted comic book stories for Timely Comics, the predecessor to Marvel Comics. He recycled the plot of The Girl in the Golden Atom for a two-part Captain America tale, Princess of the Atom, which is Captain America number 25 and 26. Interesting. He also contributed stories to the Human Torch and Submariner, which his daughter Betty Cummings often penned. It says citation needed, so take that as you will. And he died of a cerebral hemorrhage. Fun. Uh, but yeah, these are Brigands of the Moon. Yeah, it doesn't have a huge library, but some interesting stuff in there. I'll probably see if I can get a hold of The Girl in the Golden Atom, uh, which should be entertaining enough, I would imagine. If it was good enough to be turned into an old Golden Age Captain America comic, by gosh and golly and gee willikers, it's probably good enough to read here. Well, a lot of these covers are pretty goofy, which we pretty much expect. All right, so I don't know how dry this is going to be. This is going to be a blind read through. I know nothing about this other than the title, which is Brigands of the Moon. Um, It is longish. I'm hoping I'll be able to get through all of it today. We'll see where I'm at the end of like 2 hours. And if it's close enough to the end, I'll probably just forge ahead. But if it's like less than halfway through, I'll probably just divvy it up instead of being 4 installments, which it is currently placed at. It'll wind up being more like 8. Depending. Depending, of course, depending. Depending. Wow, this tea is hot. Ow. Stirring it with this spoon, and the spoon is already damn near molten. Let me just finish stirring this real quick, and that should do it. So, hopefully everyone is, oh, it's not too hot, that's fine, is staying safe. Oh god, I say take everything back. It's really hot. Ah, ooh, and minty at that. Hui. Hopefully everyone's staying safe. Hopefully not tearing apart any roommates or spouses or any of that, or close friends that you're trapped with now that the quarantine is in effect. Um, Cannibalism should always be the last resort, and there's a number of very good reasons for that. as I think we may have gone over in previous short stories. I mean, okay, yeah, if your captain is being a real, the captain of your starship is being a real, uh, insert expletive here, and you as the chef are completely done and tired of his nonsense and chicanery. Uh, Cooking him might seem like a really good idea, um, but you've before you do it, you have to just make sure and do this for me. If you're anyone on, the route between Mars and the asteroid belt, doing your mining hauls, before you, as chef of a space vessel, murder your captain because he's an asshole, please make sure someone else knows how to do all the other important ship-related things, like piloting. Make sure he doesn't have an actually vital role, because then you might all be stuck, and that would be bad because space is an uncaring mistress. Indeed, the moon is a harsh mistress, and I'd love to read that one aloud, actually. That's a really good Heinlein. Where are you? On my wall, there it is. Yes, Heinlein. Um, Oddly, I have it placed right next to I Will Fear No Evil and Stranger in a Strange Land, which I liked one of those, and the other one not so much. I Will Fear No Evil sucked. Can I mention that, please? Thank you. Um, that was not fun. However, Stranger in a Strange Land was a lot of fun. You have such entertaining and novel concepts as grokking, which sounds just as sexual as it isn't, but the rest of the book tries to be. And the less said on that, the better. It's awkward, but fun. Mm. Oh man, that is indeed minty. That is opening up my sinuses, my sinusoidal passages, which is superb. It feels good to breathe. Uh, and now, of course, my work phone is making work phone noises at me. Oh, it's just a text message. It's not a call I have to answer. Very good. All right. I guess without any further ado, this will be the Brigands of the Moon. Oh, wait. I'm forgetting something. What did I forget? What did I forget? Aha! My brain. It has told me the right smart thing. Good brain. Good brain. You have done well by me this day, brain. Okay. We are all set. Whew. All right. Or it can do that. That's fine. Joy. I know I told it the right location to record to, but it's not going to do it. I don't care. Fine. Be that way. Brigands of the Moon. The Book of Greg Haljan by Ray Cummings. And there's a foreword here, which I'll read, which is also by Ray Cummings. I have been thinking that if, during one of these long winter evenings at Valley Forge, someone had placed in George Washington's hands one of our present-day bestsellers, the illustrious father of our country would have read it with considerable emotion. I do not mean what we call a story of science or fantasy, just a novel of action, adventure, and romance. The sort of thing you and I like to read, but do not find amazing in any way at all. But I fancy that George Washington would have found it amazing. Don't you? It might picture, for instance, a factory girl at a sewing machine. George Washington would be amazed at a sewing machine. And the girl journeying in the subway to and from her work, stealing an opportunity to telephone her lover at the noon hour, going to the movies in the evening, or listening to a radio. And there might be a climax, perhaps, with the girl and the villain in a transcontinental railway Pullman, and the hero sending frantic telegrams, or telephoning the train, and then chasing it in his airplane. George Washington would have found it amazing. And I am wondering how you and I would feel if someone were to give us now a book of ordinary adventure of the sort which will be published 150 years hence. I have been trying to imagine such a book and the nature of its contents. Let us imagine it together. Suppose we walk down Fifth Avenue, a pleasant spring morning of May 2080. Fifth Avenue, no doubt, will be there. I don't know whether the New York Public Library will be there or not. We'll assume that it is, and that it has some sort of books, printed or in whatever fashion you care to imagine. The young man library attendant is surprised at our curiously antiquated aspect. We look as though we were dressed for some historical costume ball. We talk old-fashioned English, like actors in a historical play of the 1930 period. Oh, he actually does uses an in front of historical, which is proper and correct. In an historical play of the 1930 period. But we get the book. The attendant assures us it is a good average story of action and adventure. Nothing remarkable, but he read it himself and found it interesting. We thank him and take the book. But we find that the language in which it is written is too strange for comfortable reading, and it names so many extraordinary things so casually, as though we knew all about them, which we certainly do not. So we take it to the kind-hearted librarian in the language division. He modifies it to old-fashioned English of 1930, and he puts occasional footnotes to help explain some of the things we might not understand. Why he should bother to do this for us, I don't know, but let us assume that he does. And now we take the book home, in the pneumatic tube, or aerial moving sidewalk, or airship, or whatever it is we take to get home. And now that we are home, let's read the book. It ought to be interesting. Chapter 1 tells of the Grantline Moon expedition and of the mysterious Martian who followed us in the city corridor. One may write about oneself and still not be an egoist. Or, so at least they tell me. My narrative went broadcast with a fair success. It was pantomimed, and the public flashed me a reasonable approval. And so my disc publishers have suggested that I record it in more permanent form. I introduce myself, begging grace that I intrude upon your busy minutes, with my only excuse that perhaps I may amuse you. For what the commercial sellers of my pictured version were pleased to blare as my handsome face, I ask your indulgence. My feminine audience of the pantomimes was undoubtedly graciously pleased at my personality and physical aspect. That I am tall as a Viking of old and handsome as a young Norse god is very pretty talk in the selling of my product. But I deplore its intrusion into the personality of this, my recorded narrative. And so now, for preface, to all my audience I do give earnest assurance that Greg Haljan is no conceited zebra, handsomely striped by nature, and proud of it. Not so. I am, I do beg you so to believe, a very humble fellow, striving for your approval, hoping only to entertain you. My introduction. My name, Greg Haljan. My age, 25 years. I was, at the time my narrative begins, third officer on the spaceship Planetara. Our line was newly established, in 2070 to be exact, following the modern improvements of the Martel magnetic levitation. And there appears to be a footnote here. As early as 1910, it was discovered that an object magnetized under certain conditions was subject to a loss of weight, its gravity partially nullified. The Martel discovery undoubtedly followed that method. Our ship, whose home port was Great New York, carried mail and passenger traffic to and from both Venus and Mars. Of astronomical necessity, our flights were irregular. This spring, with the two other planets both close to Earth, we were making 2 complete round trips. We had just arrived in Great New York this May evening from Graybar, Venus Free State. With only 5 hours in port here, we were departing the same night at the 0 hour for Ferrok-Shahn, capital of the Martian Union. We were no sooner at the landing stage than I found a code flash summoning Dan Dean and me to Divisional Detective Headquarters. Dan Snap Dean was one of my closest friends. He was a radio helio operator of the Planetara. A small, wiry, red-headed chap with a quick, ready laugh and a wit that made everyone like him. The summons to Detective Colonel Halsey's office surprised us. Snap eyed me.
You haven't been opening any treasury vaults, have you, Greg?
He wants you also, I retorted. He laughed.
Well, he can roar at me like a traffic switchman, and my private life will remain my own.
We could not think why we should be wanted. It was the darkness of mid-evening when we left the Planetara for Halsey's office. It was not a long trip. We went direct in the upper monorail, descending into the subterranean city at Park Circle 30. We had never been to Halsey's office before. We found it to be a gloomy, vault-like place in one of the deepest corridors. The door lifted. Greg Haljan and Daniel Dean. The guard stood aside. Come in. I own that my heart was unduly thumping as we entered. The door dropped behind us. It was a small, blue-lit apartment, a steel-lined room like a vault. Colonel Halsey sat at his desk, and the big, heavy-set, florid Captain Carter, our commander of the Planetara, was here. That surprised us. We had not seen him leave the ship. Halsey smiled at us gravely. Captain Carter said, "Sit down, lads." We took the seats. There was an alarming solemnity about all this. If I had been guilty of anything that I could think of, it would have been frightening. But Halsey's first words reassured me. It's about the Grantline Moon expedition. In spite of our secrecy, the news has gotten out. We want to know how. Can you tell us? Captain Carter's huge bulk, he was about as tall as I am, towered over us as we sat before Halsey's desk. If you lads have told anyone, said anything, let slip the slightest hint about it. Snap smiled with relief, but he turned solemn at once.
I haven't, not a word.
Nor have I declared. The Grantline Moon expedition. We had not thought of that as a reason for this summons. Johnny Grantline was a close friend to us both. He had organized an exploring expedition to the moon. Uninhabited, with its bleak, forbidding, airless, waterless surface, the moon, even though so close to the Earth, was seldom visited. No regular ship ever stopped there. A few exploring parties in recent years had come to grief. But there was a persistent rumor that upon the moon mineral riches of fabulous wealth were awaiting discovery. The thing had already caused some interplanetary complications. The aggressive Martians would be only too glad to explore the moon. But the USW, and there's a footnote here, United States of the World, which came into being in 2057 upon the centenary of the Yellow War. Whoops. But the USW, United States of the World, definitely warned them away. The moon was world territory, we announced, and we would protect it as such. The threatened conflict between Earth and Mars had come to nothing. There was, this year of 2079, a thorough amity between all three of the inhabited planets. It still holds, and I pray that it may always hold. There was, nevertheless, a realization by our government that whatever riches might be upon the moon should be seized at once and held by some reputable Earth company. And when Johnny Grantline applied, with his father's wealth and his own scientific record of attainment, the government was only too glad to grant him his writ. Its writ. Man, I am fumble-mouthing more than I usually do. It always starts rough, and then it gets fine, and then it gets rough again when my lips start getting tired. The Grantline expedition had started 6 months ago. The Martian government had acquiesced in our ultimatum, yet brigands have been known to be financed under cover of a governmental disavowal, and so the expedition was kept secret. My words need give no offense to any Martian who comes upon them. I refer to the history of our Earth only. The Grantline expedition was on the moon now. No word had come from it. One could not flash helios even in code without letting all the universe know that explorers were on the moon. And why they were there, anyone could easily guess. And now Colonel Halsey was telling us that the news was abroad. Captain Carter eyed us closely. His flashing eyes under the white, bushy brows would pry a secret from anyone. "You're sure? A girl of Venus, perhaps, with her cursed seductive lure? A chance word, with you lads befuddled by alkalite?" We assured him we had been careful. By the heavens, I know that I had been. Not a whisper, even to Snap, of the name Grantline in 6 months or more. Captain Carter added abruptly, "We're insulated here, Halsey." "Yes, talk as freely as you'd like. An eavesdropping ray will never get into these walls." They questioned us. They were satisfied at last that, though the secret had escaped, we had not done it. Hearing it discussed, it occurred to me to wonder why Carter was concerned. I was not aware that he knew of Grantline's venture. I learned now the reason why the Planetara, upon each of her voyages, had managed to pass fairly close to the moon. It had been arranged with Grantline that if he wanted help or had any important message, he was to flash it locally to our passing ship. And this Snap knew, and had never mentioned it, even to me. Halsey was saying, "Well, we can't blame you, but the secret is out." Snap and I regarded each other. What could anyone do? What would anyone dare do? Captain Carter said abruptly, "Look here, lads, this is my chance to Okay, let's take that from the top. Look here, lads, this is my chance now to talk plainly to you. Outside, anywhere outside these walls, an eavesdropping ray may be upon us. You know that? One may never even dare whisper since that accursed ray was developed." Snap opened his mouth to speak, but decided against it. My heart was pounding. Captain Carter went on. "I know I can trust you two more than anyone else under me on the Planetara." "What do you mean by that?" I demanded. "What—" He interrupted me. "Nothing at all but what I say." Halsey smiled grimly. "What he means, Haljan, is that things are not always what they seem these days. One cannot always tell a friend from an enemy. The Planetara is a public vessel. You have, how many is it, Carter? 30 or 40 passengers this trip tonight?" 38, said Carter. "There are 38 people listed for the flight to Ferric Shan tonight," Halsey said slowly, "and some may not be what they seem." He raised his thin, dark hand. "We have information." He paused. "I confess we know almost nothing, hardly more than enough to alarm us." Captain Carter interjected. "I want you and Dean to be on your guard. Once on the Planetara, it is difficult for us to talk openly, but be watchful. I will arrange for us to be doubly armed." Vague, perturbing words. Halsey said, "They tell me George Prince is listed for the voyage. I am suggesting, Haljan, that you keep your eye especially upon him. Your duties on the Planetara leave you comparatively free, don't they?" "Yes," I agreed. With the first and second officers on duty and the captain aboard, my routine was more or less that of an understudy. I said, "George Prince, who is he?" "A mechanical engineer," said Halsey, "an under-official of the Earth Federated Radium Corporation, but he associates with bad companions, particularly Martians." I had never heard of this George Prince, though I was familiar with the Federated Radium Corporation, of course, a semi-government trust which controlled virtually the entire Earth supply of radium. "He was in the automotive department," Carter put in. "You've heard of the Federated Radium Motor?" We had, of course, a recent Earth invention which promised to revolutionize the automotive industry. an engine of a new type using radium as its fuel.
Snap demanded, "What in the stars has this got to do with Johnny Grantline?"
Much, said Halsey quietly, or perhaps nothing. But George Prince some years ago mixed in rather unethical transactions. We had him in custody once. He is known now as unusually friendly with several Martians in New York, of bad reputation.
"Well," began Snap.
What you don't know, Halsey went on quietly, is that Grantline expects to find radium on the moon. We gasped. Exactly, said Halsey. The ill-fated Ballon expedition thought they had found it on the moon some years ago. A new type of ore, as rich in radium as our gold-bearing sands are rich in gold. Ballon's first samples gave uranium atoms with a fair representation of ionium and thorium, a richly radioactive ore. A load of the pure radium is there somewhere, without doubt. He added vehemently, "Do you understand now why we should be suspicious of George Prince? He has a criminal record. He has a thoroughly technical knowledge of radium ores. He associates with Martians of bad reputation. A large Martian company has recently developed a radium engine to compete with our Earth motor. You know that? You know that there is very little radium available on Mars, and our government will not allow our own radium supply to be exported. That Martian company needs radium. It will do anything to get radium. What do you suppose it would pay for a few tons of really rich radioactive ore, such as Grantline may have found on the moon?" "But," I objected, "that is a reputable Martian company. It's backed by the government of the Martian Union. The government of Mars would not dare—" "Of course not!" Captain Carter exclaimed sardonically. "Not openly. But if Martian brigands had a supply of radium, I don't imagine where it came from would make much difference. That Martian company would buy it." Halsey added, "And George Prince, my agents inform me, seems to know that Grantline is on the moon. Put it all together, lads. Little sparks show the hidden current. More than that. George Prince knows that we have arranged to have the Planetara stop at the moon and bring back Grantline's radium ore. This is your last voyage this year. You'll hear from Grantline this time, we're convinced. He'll probably give you the signal as you pass the moon on your way out. Coming back, you'll stop at the moon and transport whatever radium ore Grantline has ready. The Grantline flyer is too small for ore transportation." Halsey's voice turned grimly sarcastic. "Doesn't it seem queer that George Prince and a few of his Martian friends happen to be listed as passengers for this voyage?" In the silence that followed, Snap and I regarded each other. Halsey added abruptly, "We had George Prince typed that time we arrested him 4 years ago. I'll show him to you." He snapped open an alcove and said to his waiting attendant, "Get me the type of George Prince." The disc in a moment came through the pneumatic. Halsey, smiling wryly, adjusted it. "A nice-looking fellow. Nicely spoken. Though at the time we made this he was somewhat annoyed, naturally. He is older now. 29, to be exact. Here he is." The image glowed on the grids before us. His name, George Prince, in letters illumined upon his forehead, showed for a moment and then faded. He stood smiling sourly before us as he repeated the official formula.
"My name is George Prince. I was born in Great New York City 25 years ago."
I gazed at this life-size, moving image of George Prince. He stood somber in the black detention uniform, a dark, almost a girlishly handsome fellow, well below medium height. The rod beside him showed 5 feet 4 inches. Slim and slight, long, wavy black hair falling about his ears, A pale, clean-cut, really handsome face, almost beardless. I regarded it closely. A face that would have been femininely beautiful without its masculine touch of heavy black brows and firmly set jaw. His voice as he spoke was low and soft, but at the end, with the concluding words, "I am innocent," it flashed into strong masculinity. His eyes, shaded with long, girlish black lashes, by chance met mine. "I am innocent." His curving, sensuous lips drew down into a grim sneer. The type faded at its end. Halsey replaced the disc in its box and waved the attendant away. "Thank you." He turned back to Snap and me. "Well, there he is. We have nothing tangible against him now. But I'll say this. He's a clever fellow, one to be afraid of. I would not blare it from the newscaster's microphone, but if he is hatching any plot, he has been too clever for my agents." We talked for another half hour, and then Captain Carter dismissed us. We left Halsey's office with Carter's final words ringing in our ears. "Whatever comes, lads, remember, I trust you." Snap and I decided to walk a portion of the way back to the ship. It was barely more than a mile through this subterranean corridor to where we could get to the vertical lift direct to the landing stage. We started off on the lower level. Once outside the insulation of Halsey's office, we did not dare talk of this thing. Not only electric ears, but every possible eavesdropping device might be upon us. The corridor was 200 feet or more below the ground level. At this hour of the night, this business section was comparatively deserted. The through tube sounded over our heads with the passing of its occasional trains. The ventilators buzzed and whirred. At the cross intersections, the traffic directors dozed at their posts. It was hot and sticky down here, and gloomy with the daylight globes extinguished, and only the night lights to give a dim illumination. The stores and office arcades were all closed and deserted, only an occasional nightlight burning behind their windows. Our footfalls echoed on the metal grids as we hurried along.
Nice evening, said Snap awkwardly.
"Yes," I said, "isn't it?" I felt oppressed, as though prying eyes and ears were here. We walked for a time in silence, each of us busy with memory of what had transpired in Halsey's office. Suddenly, Snap gripped me.
"What's that?"
"Where?" I whispered. We stopped at a corner. An entryway was here. Snap pulled me into it. I could feel him quivering with excitement.
"What is it?"
I demanded in a whisper.
"We're being followed. Did you hear anything?"
"No." Yet I thought now I could hear something. Vague footfalls, a rustling, and a microscopic electrical whine as though some device were near us. Snap was fumbling in his pocket.
"Wait, I've got a pair of low-scale phones."
He put the little grids against his ears. I could hear the sharp intake of his breath. Then he seized me, pulled me down to the metal floor of the entryway.
"Back, Greg! Get back!"
I could barely hear his whisper. We crouched as far back into the doorway as we could get. I was armed. My official permit for the carrying of the pencil heat ray allowed me to have it always with me. I drew it now, but there was nothing to shoot at. I felt Snap clamping the grids on my ears. And now I heard something, an intensification of the vague footsteps I had thought I heard before. There was something following us. Something out in the corridor there now. A streetlight was nearby. The corridor was dim but plainly visible, and to my sight it was empty. But there was something there, something invisible. I could hear it moving, creeping towards us. I pulled the grids off my ears. Snap murmured,
"You've got a local phone?"
"Yes. I'll get them to give us the street glare." I pressed the danger signal, giving our location to the nearest operator. In a second or two, we got the light. The street in all this neighborhood burst into a brilliant actinic glare. The thing menacing us was revealed. A figure in a black cloak, crouching 30 feet away across the corridor. Snap was on his feet. His voice rang shrilly.
"There it is! Give it a shot, Greg!"
Snap was unarmed, but he flung his hands out menacingly. The figure, which may perhaps not have been aware of our city safeguard, was taken wholly by surprise. A human figure. 7 feet tall at the least, and therefore, I judged, doubtless a Martian man. The black cloak covered his head. He took a step toward us, hesitated, and then turned in confusion. Snap's shrill voice was bringing help. The whine of a street guard's alarm whistle nearby sounded. The figure was making off. My pencil ray was in my hand, and I pressed its switch. The tiny heat ray stabbed through the glare, but I missed. The figure stumbled, but did not fall. I saw a bare gray arm come from the cloak, flung up to maintain its balance. Or perhaps my pencil ray of heat had seared the arm. The gray-skinned arm of a Martian. Snap was shouting,
"Give him another!"
but the figure passed beyond the actinic glare and vanished. We were detained in the turmoil of the corridor for 10 minutes or more with official explanations. Then a message from Halsey released us. The Martian who had been following us in his invisible cloak was never caught. We escaped from the crowd at last and made our way back to the Planetara, where the passengers were already assembling for the outward Martian voyage. Chapter 2. A Fleeting Glance. I stood on the turret balcony of the Planetara with Captain Carter and Dr. Frank, the ship's surgeon, watching the arriving passengers. It was close to the 0 hour. The level of the stage was a turmoil of confusion. The escalators, with the last of the freight aboard, were folded back. But the stage was jammed with the incoming passenger baggage. The interplanetary customs and tax officials with their X-ray and Z-ray paraphernalia, and the passengers themselves lined up for the export inspection. At this height, the city lights lay spread in a glare of blue and yellow beneath us. The individual local planes came dropping like birds to our stage. 38 passengers for this flight to Mars, but that accursed desire of every friend and relative to speed the departing Voyager brought 100 or more extra people to crowd our girders and bring added difficulty to everybody. Carter was too absorbed in his duties to stay with us long, but here in the turret, Dr. Frank and I found ourselves at the moment with nothing much to do but watch. "Think we'll get away on time, Greg?" "No," I said. "And this of all voyages." I checked myself with thumping heart. My thoughts were so full of what Halsey and Carter had told us that it was difficult to rein my tongue. Yet here in the turret, unguarded by insulation, I could say nothing. Nor would I have dared mention the Grantline Moon expedition to Dr. Frank. I wondered what he knew of this affair. Perhaps as much as I. Perhaps nothing. He was a thin, dark, rather smallish man of 50, this ship's surgeon, trim in his blue and white uniform. I knew him well. We had made several flights together. An American, I fancy of Jewish ancestry. A likable man and a skillful doctor and surgeon. He and I had always been good friends. "Crowded," he said. "Johnson says 38. I hope they're experienced travelers. This precious sickness is a rotten nuisance. Keeps me dashing around all night assuring frightened women they're not going to die. Last voyage, coming out of the Venus atmosphere." He plunged into a lugubrious account of his troubles with space-sick voyagers, but I was in no mood to listen. My gaze was down on the spider incline up, which, over the bend of the ship's sleek silvery body, the passengers and their friends were coming up in little groups. The upper deck was already jammed with them. The Planetara, as flyers go, was not a large vessel. Cylindrical of body, 40 feet maximum beam, and 275 feet in overall length. The passenger superstructure, no more than 100 feet long, was set amidships. A narrow deck, metallic enclosed, with large bullseye windows, encircled the superstructure. Some of the cabins opened directly onto the deck. Others had doors to the interior corridors. There were half a dozen small but luxurious public rooms. The rest of the vessel was given to freight storage and the mechanism and control compartments. Forward of the passenger structure, the deck level continued under the cylindrical dome roof to the bow. The forward watchtower observatory was here, officers' cabins, Captain Carter's navigating rooms, and Dr. Frank's office. Similarly, under the stern dome was the stern watchtower and a series of power compartments. Above the superstructure, a confusion of spider bridges, ladders, and balconies were laced like a metal network. The turret in which Dr. Frank and I now stood was perched here. 50 feet away, like a bird's nest, Snap's instrument room stood clinging to the metal bridge. The dome roof, with the glassite windows rolled back now, rose in a mound peak to cover this highest middle portion of the vessel. Below, in the main hull, blue-lit metal corridors ran the entire length of the ship. Freight storage compartments, gravity control rooms, the air renewal systems, heater and ventilators and pressure mechanisms, all were located there. And the kitchens, steward's compartments, and the living quarters of the crew. We carried a crew of 16 this voyage, exclusive of the navigating officers and the purser, Snap Dean and Dr. Frank. The passengers coming aboard seemed a fair representation of what we usually had for the outward voyage to Ferrok Shahn. Most were Earth people and returning Martians. Dr. Frank pointed out one, a huge Martian in a gray cloak, a 7-foot fellow.
His name is Set Miko, Dr. Frank remarked. Ever heard of him?
No, I said. Should I?
Well,
the doctor suddenly checked himself, as though he were sorry he had spoken. I never heard of him, I repeated slowly. An awkward silence fell suddenly between us. There were a few Venus passengers. I saw one of them presently coming up the incline, and recognized her, a girl traveling alone. We had brought her from Grebhar, the last voyage but one. What? Last voyage but one. Maybe the voyage before last? I don't know. I remembered her. An alluring sort of girl, as most of them are. Her name was Venza. She spoke English well. A singer and dancer who had been imported to Great New York to fill some theatrical engagement. She'd made quite a hit on the Great White Way. She came up the incline, with the carrier ahead of her. Gazing up, she saw Dr. Frank and me at the turret window and waved her white arm in greeting, and flashed us a smile. Dr. Frank laughed.
By the gods of the airways, there's Alta Venza. You saw that look, Greg? That was for me, not you.
Reasonable enough, I retorted, but I doubt it. The Venza was nothing if not impartial. I wondered what could be taking Venza now to Mars. I was glad to see her. She was diverting, educated, well-traveled, spoke English with a colloquial, theatrical manner more characteristic of Great New York than of Venus. And for all her light banter, I would rather put my trust in her than any Venus girl I had ever met. The hum of the departing siren was sounding. Friends and relatives of the passengers were crowding the exit incline. The deck was clearing. I had not seen George Prince come aboard. And then I thought I saw him down on the landing stage, just arrived from a private tube car. A small, slight figure. The customs men were around him. I could only see his head and shoulders. Pale, girlishly handsome face, long black hair to the base of his neck.
He was bareheaded, with the hood of his traveling cloak pushed back. I stared, and I saw that Dr. Frank was also gazing down, but neither of us spoke. Then I said, upon impulse, "Suppose we go down to the deck, Doctor." He acquiesced. We descended to the lower room of the turret and clambered down the spider ladder to the upper deck level. The head of the arriving incline was near us. Preceded by two carriers who were littered with hand baggage, George Prince was coming up the incline. He was closer now. I recognized him from the type we had seen in Halsey's office. And then, with a shock, I saw it was not so. This was a girl coming aboard. An arch light over the incline showed her clearly when she was halfway up. A girl with her hood pushed back, her face framed in thick black hair. I saw now it was not a man's cut of hair, but long braids coiled up under the dangling hood. Dr. Frank must have remarked my amazed expression. "Little beauty, isn't she?" "Who is she?" We were standing back against the wall of the superstructure. A passenger was near us, the Martian whom Dr. Frank had called Miko. He was loitering here, quite evidently watching this girl come aboard. But as I glanced at him, he looked away and casually sauntered off. The girl came up and reached the deck. "I am in A-22," she told the carrier. "My brother came aboard 2 hours ago." Dr. Frank answered my whisper. "That's Anita Prince." She was passing quite close to us on the deck, following the carrier, when she stumbled and very nearly fell. I was nearest to her. I leapt forward and caught her as she went down. "Oh!" she cried. With my arm about her, I raised her up and set her upon her feet again. She had twisted her ankle. She balanced herself upon it. The pain of it eased up in a moment. "I'm all right, thank you." In the dimness of the blue-lit deck, I met her eyes. I was holding her with my encircling arm. She was small and soft against me. Her face, framed in the thick black hair, smiled up at me. Small, oval face, beautiful, yet firm of chin and stamped with the mark of its own individuality. No empty-headed beauty, this. "I'm all right, thank you very much." I became conscious that I had not released her. I felt her hands pushing at me. And then it seemed that for an instant she yielded and was clinging. And I met her startled, upflung gaze. Eyes like a purple night with the sheen of a misty starlight in them. I heard myself murmuring, "I beg your pardon. Yes, of course." I released her. She thanked me again and followed the carrier along the deck. She was limping slightly from the twisted ankle. An instant while she had clung to me, and I had held her. A brief flash of something from her eyes to mine, from mine back to hers. The poets write that love can be born of such a glance. The first meeting, across all barriers of which love springs unsought, unbidden, defiant sometimes. And the troubadours of old would sing, "A fleeting glance, a touch, two wildly beating hearts, and love was born." I think, with Anita and me, it must have been like that. I stood gazing after her, unconscious of Dr. Frank, who was watching me with his humorous smile. And presently, no more than a quarter beyond the 0 hour, the Planetara got away. With the dome windows battened tightly, we lifted from the landing stage and soared over the glowing city. The phosphorescence of the electronic tubes was like a comet's tail behind us as we slid upward. At the tri-night hour, the heat of our atmospheric passage was over. The passengers had all retired. The ship was quiet, with empty decks and dim, silent corridors. Vibrationless, with the electronic engines cut off and only the hum of the Martel magnetizers to break the unnatural stillness. We were well beyond the Earth's atmosphere, heading out in the cone path of the Earth's shadow, in the direction of the moon. Chapter 3. In the Helio Room. At 6 a.m. Earth Eastern Time, which we were still carrying, Snap Dean and I were alone in his instrument room, perched in the network over the Planetara's deck. The bulge of the dome enclosed us. It rounded like a great observatory window some 20 feet above the ceiling of this little metal cubbyhole. The Planetara was still in the Earth's shadow. The firmament, black interstellar space with its blazing white, red, and yellow stars, lay spread around us. The moon, with nearly all its disk illumined, hung, a great silver ball, over our bow quarter. Behind it, to one side, Mars floated like the red tip of a smoldering cigarillo in the blackness. The Earth, behind our stern, was dimly, redly visible, a giant sphere etched with the configurations of its oceans and continents. Upon one limb a touch of the sunlight hung on the mountain tops with a crescent red-yellow sheen. And then we plunged from the cone shadow. The sun, with the leaping corona, burst through the blackness behind us. The earth lighted into a huge, thin crescent with hooked cusps. To Snap and me, the glories of the heavens were too familiar to be remarked, and upon this voyage particularly we were in no mood to consider them. I had been in the helio room several hours. When the Planetara started, my few routine duties were over. I could think of nothing save Halsey's and Carter's admonition, "Be on your guard, and particularly watch George Prince." I had not seen George Prince, but I had seen his sister, whom Carter and Halsey had not bothered to mention. My heart was still pounding with the memory. When the passengers had retired and the ship quieted, I prowled through the passenger corridors. This was about the trinite hour. There's a footnote here. Trinite hour, i.e. 3 a.m. Hot as the corridors of hell, with our hull and the glassite dome seething with the friction of our atmospheric flight. But the refrigerators mitigated that. The ventilators blasted cold air from the renewers into every corner of the vessel. Within an hour or two, with the cold of space striking us, it was hot air that was needed. Dr. Frank was evidently having little trouble with pressure-sick passengers. And there's another footnote. Footnote number 4. Pressure sickness caused by the difficulty of maintaining a constantly normal air pressure within the vessel owing to the sudden extreme changes from heat to cold. Seems sort of reasonable, I guess, in a way. The Planetara's equalizers were fairly efficient. I did not encounter Dr. Frank. I prowled through the silent metal lounges and passages. I went to the door of A22. It was on the deck level, in a tiny transverse passage just off the main lounging room. Its name grid glowed with the letters Anita Prince. I stood in my short white trousers and white silk shirt, like a cabin steward gawping. Anita Prince. I had never heard the name until this night, but there was magic music in it now as I murmured it to myself. Anita Prince. She was here, doubtless asleep, behind this small metal door. It seemed as though that little oval grid were the gateway to a fairyland of my dreams. I turned away, and thought of the Grantline Moon expedition. Stabbed at me. George Prince, Anita's brother, he whom I had been told to watch. This renegade, associate of dubious Martians, plotting God knows what. I saw, upon the adjoining door, A20, George Prince. I listened. In the humming stillness of the ship's interior there was no sound from these cabins. A20 was without windows, I knew. But Anita's room had a window and a door which gave upon the deck. I went through the lounge, out its arch, and walked the deck length. The deck door and window of A22 were closed and dark. The 10-foot wide deck was dim with white starlight from the side ports. Chairs were here, but they were all empty. From the bow windows of the arching dome, a flood of moonlight threw long, slanting shadows down the deck. At the corner where the superstructure ended, I thought I saw a figure lurking as though watching me. I went that way, but it vanished. I turned the corner, went the width of the ship to the other side. There was no one in sight save the observer on his spider bridge, high in the bow network, and the second officer on duty on the turret balcony almost directly over me. As I stood and listened, I suddenly heard footsteps. From the direction of the bow, a figure came. Purser Johnson. He greeted me. "Cooling off, Grig?" "Yes," I said. He went past me and turned into the smoking room door nearby. I stood a moment at one of the deck windows, gazing at the stars, and for no reason at all I realized I was tense. Johnson was a great one for his regular sleep. It was wholly unlike him to be roaming about the ship at such an hour. Had he been watching me? I told myself it was nonsense. I was suspicious of everyone, everything, this voyage. I heard another step. Captain Carter appeared from his chart room, which stood in the center of the narrowing open deck space near the bow. I joined him at once. "Who was that?" he half whispered. "Johnson."